Welcome to PodSpot, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of HubSpot with industry experts and thought leaders. I'm Jon Pittam, founder of HubSpot consultancy Karman Digital, and today's episode is part 2 of our Best of HubSpot Beta 2024. We're unpacking the 2024 releases and updates on HubSpot that are transforming the way businesses operate. And my word, there has been a lot of beta updates in 2024. I'm delighted to be joined today by Jon Dean and Jaime Boardman. Good day, fellas.
Afternoon.
And we have with us 2 developers. So Jon is front-end, React, CRM, clever stuff. And Jaime, you go deep on API and all that dark stuff. So today's going to be a slightly different episode in that you guys are probably going to talk about a lot of stuff that I hear about but don't understand. I think that's about right, I would guess.
Yeah, I'll try and use small words and bring it to the layman.
That would be helpful. Our audience are HubSpotters, probably not developers. Maybe a few developers on the who listen into this. And hello, developers, if you're with us today. But yeah, we're gonna go deep on HubSpot. I think we're gonna cover things like React, and we're gonna cover webhooks and API documentation. I think there's going to be some interesting stuff in here. I think most of the betas that came out are kind of front-end type stuff, CRM. So it's going to be nice to hear from you guys in terms of the stuff that you've seen. So without further ado, thinking about the betas that have come in 2024, JD, what stood out for you?
Just before I kick off, the way you did that little bit of intro might scare some people off. We tell them it's all about React and APIs, when in reality, what Jaime and I will say is how it's going to benefit people, really. And I think that's what most people want to know. The bits for me, as a developer that works on building the website side of things, and also extending HubSpot's usage, there's a couple of betas that have come in over the past, say, 8 to 12 months, where HubSpot has brought React into HubSpot. Now, for those who don't know what React is, which is, I imagine, quite a lot of people listening, React is a JavaScript framework which Facebook built for Facebook. So they built it so that the news feed would automatically react to any new posts or any new likes or any new comments without the user having to reload the page. But what Facebook did, or Meta as they're now known, is they open sourced React. So they made it available for anyone to use. And over the years, it's got better and better and better. And the take-up of React has been huge across the internet. You have sites like the BBC and Netflix at one point were using React as part of their app. So React is a great little framework, and HubSpot have now sort of brought React under the hood for us to be able to use in a couple of different ways. Now, one way of using it is to change how HubSpot looks and feels and works if you're just in HubSpot and you're on a contact record or a deal record. We can now create custom UI cards, UI extensions using React that tap into all the different parts of HubSpot and really allow us to customize the layout, not just using some like little bits that already exist in HubSpot, but allowing us to really tweak the elements to be bespoke to a specific client. I think the best way to sort of explain this in a real world case is we had a property management company, and on their deals, they have a number of associated contacts to that deal. But there are some required things that need to happen for that property management company in order to finalize the deal. So it might be documentation that's required for whoever's purchasing this property or leasing this property. Now, in normal HubSpot world, on that deal, you would have the associated contacts. But in order to see whether there might be 2 or 3 contacts that are associated, you would then need to go into each individual contact record, and then you'd need to go and look at all the properties to see if those required ones that you want for your deal have been filled out. Whereas what we did for the client was we created a custom deal card that sits on the deal. that pulls in the required fields for every single contact that are associated with that deal. And it has it right there at the top of the center column. So it just allowed the client to go into that deal and they see that information, see what's missing. And then if they've got that information, they can update it right there on the card without going into the contact record. So that is, in a nutshell, how you can sort of really customize a bespoke element for a particular client for their particular use case, and just have it. It just speeds up time. It speeds up the deals getting closed, and it just gives you all that information in one place rather than having to start clicking through to a contact, then clicking through to all the properties, and then scrolling down the properties. It's there, it's front and center for the actual users, and it just speeds things up, and it makes sure that the stuff that they need is there, and that they can see what's missing. So that's
nice.
That's I forgot to pause for a breath then, but that's
a really thorough explanation of React, Jon. I really like that.
Yeah, so that's where the UI cards come into their own. Then there's the other flip side. I don't know if you want me to carry on talking for a bit, or to bring Jaime in for a bit of variety.
No, you're a roll, JD.
Yeah,
keep going.
The other
keep
flip
going. This
side
is good.
It's the beta that's happened with the website. So on HubSpot, we've had the ability for many years to build custom modules and tap into different elements within the CRM in order to display stuff on the website. What we can now do with React is we can still build similar modules or exactly the same modules, but it means we can do far more advanced things because we can use React and we can use all these other libraries that you couldn't previously use in HubSpot. Because we now have the React infrastructure. But I think one of the best ways, or one of the ways that we'll be definitely using this is, even if you've got something as simple as a button. Let's just say we've got a web page, and on that page, we've got 5 or 6 buttons on that page. Now, in the old world of just doing custom modules, you could drop a custom module for a button in there, and that's fine. And then you go down and you drop another one in. But the way Google and other search engines, mainly Google, they qualify your site on a number of things, and one of them is page speed. So the more things you have on a page, the higher the slower your page loads, basically. But with React in custom modules, you can use this special thing called islands. And when it comes to islands, you can say hydrate the island only when it comes into view. So it's in effect, it's like lazy loading the element. So if that element if it's a button and it is all the way down the page and it's not in view when the page loads, it doesn't actually load the scripts. It doesn't load anything into the DOM, into the document. So the page starts loading really quickly. And then as you scroll down, that React element comes in view and it says, hydrate this island, and then it views it. So it only actually loads the script, only loads the actual button element, or it could be an image, it could be something more complex, as it scrolls into view, which massively increases the page speed, which is really good for like your SEO. So
nice.
I'm definitely going to take a drink of my tea now.
Yeah, do. Well, I didn't think we'd be talking about hydrating islands in this podcast, but I've learned something today, JD, and that React stuff makes the platform incredibly powerful, I guess. And one of the things is also this idea of ease and simplicity that is what we're building for when we build out for clients is, they want the data in front of the user at that point, not have to go off to different places. And that's, I guess, what React allows us to do. Just adding into that, and I don't know whether this is a beta or whether this has been around for a while, but it might segue into APIs. And the ability now to present data on CRM cards that sits on third-party applications, but that data isn't in HubSpot, but it is presented within a HubSpot via the CRM cards. Is that related to this?
Yeah, the example I gave earlier about a CRM card that we did for a particular client that helped them improve their process. With the CRM cards, you can use APIs to fetch data from an external system to pull in and show in the HubSpot. It could be whichever record it is. So if we create it as a card for a contact record or for a deal record or wherever it might be, you can pull in information from another system and then display it inside a HubSpot. So which has been especially useful for a few of our banking customers where they've got maybe information over in their banking system that they can't physically hold at this time in HubSpot because of security and financial
Sensitive
reasons.
data, yeah.
But that, that secure data is becoming more open for us to actually start storing in HubSpot. But it means that we could actually go and fetch it on, like, let's just say a contact record loads. We could go and get the unique ID, fetch that information or whichever information we want to display from their banking system, and then it show in the right-hand side or in the main area, wherever this card is. We can then show some information. And because it's not stored in HubSpot, that's why it can then be shown in HubSpot, even though it's being fetched from different places. That makes sense.
Nice. So it really extends HubSpot's capability. And it's interesting to talk to a client earlier this week about trying to ensure that all the data everybody needed was within HubSpot, but they didn't actually want to have some of that data held in HubSpot. And this is a solution for it. Yeah. Which nicely segues onto yourself, Jaime Boardman, and going into APIs and webhooks. So talk to me. Betas 2024, what is it for you?
Yeah, there's two. One that's been in the works seemingly forever, but it's just kind of ticked over and it's doing fantastic work. And but I'll talk about the first one first, which is generic webhooks. So historically, if you've ever tried to integrate with HubSpot, they've had webhook capabilities on private apps and public apps, but those webhooks were limited to contacts, deals, companies, kind of the main free plus some weird niche objects to listen to. Webhooks are, I realize I haven't actually explained what a webhook is, and we are talking about HubSpot people. Webhooks are a means to listen for events within a platform. So within HubSpot, a webhook is a change of a property against a client, contacts, contact being created, deleted, all these sorts of events can be listened for, and then something can happen outside of the system to talk to another system or do whatever. Do something else in HubSpot, whatever you want to do. So originally they had quite a limited number, it's just the main objects that you'd always hear about. And then recently they've brought out generic webhooks, which extends the ability to listen to changes on basically any object in the platform, even some ones you wouldn't think about, like quotes. Listen for changes on those as they are an object, even though they are also a web page. And all the sorts of things in between, task being an object in and of itself. You can listen for changes, creations, all sorts of stuff on that. And then on top of all of that, if you're an enterprise customer, you can listen for changes against custom objects, which is a whole nother level of customization within HubSpot that we just didn't have before, speaking about the same property management company, we originally built out a piece of integration for them to talk with a separate system, and we needed to listen for a change on a custom property, on a custom object. And originally, we built it just before this had even been released as a thing that was happening. And I was like, but we did it through creating a separate deal and triggering off of that deal based off of workflows within HubSpot. And it was kind of a nasty workaround. And now we have just recently updated that to just use a single trigger. And I spoke to the client about it and they were like, oh, wow, it goes almost instantly now. I'm like, yep, because we don't have to do any of that weird workaround. So suddenly the speed at which they're getting that data into their separate system is almost instantaneous, which is massively valuable to them because then they have it.
So if I can put that into, simple terms for me, I guess. So that is something on an object, listening for a change that will then automatically go and grab data from a third party and pull that data in. Is that part of this? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, it's also allowing you to push something. So it's listening out for something happening. Once something happens, you can then choose what you want to do with something, whether you want to update something somewhere else, update something in HubSpot. But a webhook is basically, it's like someone putting a hand up to say, here you go, something's changed, and talk to me about what you want me to do with the change.
Historically, you'll hear about polling, which is where you're constantly hitting the API to check if there's been any changes. Webhooks are the modern version of that, where the system informs you of when there's been a change. So you no longer have to waste API calls and checks to see for changes, check for changes. You can instead just wait. and React straight off of them, allowing you to have that more reactive like integration as opposed to sort of something that maybe updates once a week or that sort of thing. Add some more real time.
And this helps. I guess this can help in some areas where people talk about API limits and hitting API limits.
Yeah, massively.
Yeah.
It's one of those key bits that a lot of people will use, the search API to kind of check for the most recently updated, but realistically, you can just implement a webhook to do the same thing.
Yeah. It's quite interesting, actually, Jamie. You mentioned about API limits and constantly querying things. One of the other really good things that's been brought in over the past, I don't know, it's probably a little bit over 12 months now, but is the ability to use something called GraphQL to query and update in HubSpot. And without getting really nerdy, I mean, Jamie will probably go into it better than I will, but GraphQL is just a much nicer way to get batches of data out of HubSpot, or even within code that we're writing, whether it's a UI extension, whether it's a module, whether it's an API integration that Jamie might be doing. But it's just a much nicer way of querying the HubSpot API using GraphQL rather than doing individual fetches on the API. I don't know if you've got more to say about that, Jamie, but GraphQL is...
I don't want to get too deep into it. We could talk about it, but we've utilized GraphQL for some of our own internal UI extensions, which it just makes them a lot faster, and you'd be surprised at the speed improvement that you can get from using GraphQL on those extensions. And I would assume the same would go for using serverless functions within a website within HubSpot if you were calling the HubSpot API.
Yeah, because if you think about an API call, you might be asking for a number of contacts or something like that, or give me a list of contacts. And then that API call might trigger and run in a loop in order to go and get contact 1, contact 2, contact 3, contact 4. Whereas with the GraphQL, you can do a batch call and say, give me 100 contacts. So it gives you it all in one call instead of doing 100 calls. So that's where it sort of speeds things up. And I am oversimplifying things because I'm thinking of the audience and people falling asleep.
And me. And you're simplifying for me, JD. So
that's it. That's definitely we're simplifying for you, John.
Yeah.
This is more realistically just for developers, but also I think to some degree for people looking to integrate with HubSpot, who maybe you are looking to use HubSpot or you have a team of developers within your company and you want to look at what you can do with HubSpot. The API documentation in HubSpot has always been pretty solid. They have recently been building and have released the beta docs, which are a much cleaner, much more organized, what I would just say is just generally better user experience. The old one was pretty good user experience. This one is just 10 times better than that. And it's more so around, I found more joy in this, in being able to send this documentation to people, say other developers for clients, and being like, just not having to worry about being embarrassed by the documentation that you're sending over. Because I deal with a lot of very niche platforms, and sometimes the documentation is a PDF that you get sent secretly via email. There's a lot of secret handshakes going on.
Those.
But with these, it's really clean. It's all there. You can test the API within the documentation itself, which makes it nice and easy. They've got a really nice Postman doc collection, which is a system for testing out APIs. It's very nice. I personally don't use it. Preferentials. But yeah, I highly recommend, like, if you have developers on your team and you're looking to use something within HubSpot, just like being able to just search for those docs and open them up and just, you can kind of see exactly where you're going. I think somebody who uses HubSpot could sit next to a developer and talk them through all of the bits because of how it's organized into the CRM and the CRM objects underneath that. So you can see like, oh yeah, I want to actually access that piece, which is like, oh, I want to access engagements and I want to access tasks within engagements. And you can kind of follow the logic of the user experience within the API docs for someone. Yeah.
So that's really interesting, Jamie, because I talk a lot to prospects and clients about, HubSpot's API is great. You can do lots with it. It's really flexible, etc. But I think that's really interesting of connecting the CRM users and those people who live in my world, which is the world above the dark arts and kind of where normal people are. And then your world where the really clever people operate who do, undertake dark arts. But actually combining those then with documentation that allows people like me to understand that and actually have a valid conversation with a developer around, hold on, we can grab that, we could do that, we could push that over there, actually makes for quite exciting opportunities, particularly for in-house teams.
I think it just gives you that visibility of what the platform, what you can have access to, because it just lists them out in the things you'd expect, like associations. Oh yeah, commerce, the commerce hubs, the CRM commerce, right? You can see everything that you can access through the commerce hub. It doesn't just throw a bunch of code at you. It'll kind of give you a little introduction to that endpoint. And, you can kind of see what's possible, what's not possible. There is a point where you'll need a developer, but I think there is a nice way you can kind of walk through some of this with a developer. And I feel like you get more out of it than just sending a developer to it by themselves and just letting them go. Because a lot of the time they don't use the platform. They don't know what they're really looking at there.
Yeah. They're not in the practical real world, I guess, of using the platform, and that's where this sort of stuff really helps. I think that's really interesting, Jamie, and really important. I think in terms of where we're getting to, which and we talk about all the time, just how extendable and flexible HubSpot is as a platform. As it starts to take on Salesforce more in terms of configuration and capability, then all of this stuff is brilliant. And actually making things easier and simpler for users is just at the heart of everything, which is great. So that's been really interesting, guys. And I've got a number of questions here, but you guys have covered them in your answers. So that's really impressive. But let's think about, that was 2024. With your developer hats on, thinking about 2025, what would you like to see coming down the pipe in betas for 2025? Jamie, I'll come to you first.
Okay. Yeah, I think, in my experience, as it will go along, is more things will become accessible via the API. So that there'll be beta endpoints that they bring out all the time. There's a whole other area that we didn't touch on, which is beta endpoints that they bring out. They bring them out all the time. There's currently one for lists. It's probably a newer endpoint than the old endpoints for lists. It just runs better. It'll be a nicer thing to use. Stuff like that, where we might find something we want to do in HubSpot, and 2 months later there's a beta for that particular endpoint that wasn't before. They are constantly trying to make all of HubSpot accessible via API to some degree, which I think is very, very impressive and is quite a big undertaking in and of itself. So yeah, that's kind of the big ones for me is those beta endpoints that you can kind of get access to, and anything to do with like the private apps they've set up. They've taken those from being something very small to very, very, very good in terms of like being able to access webhooks and all sorts from them. So yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a question on that, and it might be a question that our audience wants answering as well, but I certainly do. Just talk me through very briefly the difference between a private app and a public app.
A private app is something fairly new. I think it's this year. Maybe last year, that you can it's specific to your portal. You go into your settings and you can create a private app if you're a super admin, and it allows you to have like a static access token. So usually you use OAuth to access it, which means you have to, like, if you've ever installed an app on the marketplace, you go in, you have to sign in, you have to say, okay, I'm happy to install this. It tells you what you're going to give access to. Blah, 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 blah. And then you have access and stuff running in the background. With a private app, you get basically a static access token, an API key in of itself. You set the scopes for what you want to do. It's sort of more for the stuff that we build, where it's specifically for a client. We'll tend to use private apps. If you're building something internally with your dev team, it'll be a private app. That's kind of where private apps sit. They still give you access to all the same stuff. And you also have access to webhooks on top of that. So that's really, really nice. And then public app is bigger. So the stuff you'll see on the marketplace, they're all public apps. They allow for a lot of extra bits. So one of the things that public apps offers is custom events. So you can set up not webhooks, but these, like on events.
Yep. Event timeline.
Yeah, event timeline. So you can create custom ones of those specific to that app. You're thinking, for PandaDocs app, you could see custom events based around that. If they viewed it and all that sort of stuff, they might do that. Along with all this other stuff around settings pages. And there's a lot more. The public app gets very deep into stuff. It's for those multiple users, larger companies creating an app that connects X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I get it. Understood. That is good. Thank you, Jaime. That's really clear. JD then, 2025 wish list. What's on it?
Well, I think for me, I talked earlier about the UI extensions using React, but the UI extensions, within React, you have things called components, and those components might be a button, a drop down, something like that. In those UI React cards, you can't just use any component in the world. You could only use the HubSpot components, which is good because it still gives you that whole look and feel. So when you've got one of those UI cards, it looks like it belongs. But there are some occasions where you might want to have something that doesn't exist. So let's just say if you've got a car hire company and you want to have all of the, if you open a client record, we know where the client is because we've got their address. Ideally, you want to see on a map the pins of the nearest car hire offices or something like that, just as an example. Now, in an ideal world, we'll be able to use the Google Maps API in order to plot that and show it on a card. But you can't, because you can only use the HubSpot components. You can't use the Google Map component. So it'd be nice if more stuff like that got opened up to use within the CRM, because then it gives us an extra level of extensibility. What other things would I like to see from a developer perspective, or a website build, or using building websites within within HubSpot? If you go to create a page, for example, this year they brought out the forms beta, which takes away from the legacy forms, starts giving us the ability to do multi-step forms and skip things. I'd be really interested to see
by type form. That's what, yeah.
Yeah, if it's more like Typeform, for example, I'd love to see more stuff happening on that, because the legacy forms, apart from giving you a form that you can get a contact into your system, they weren't brilliant if you had some complex stuff that you wanted to go on. So I would be really interested to see what happens with that.
I hear people wanting to see improvements in sandbox. Is that something you...
Yeah, sandboxes are they're good, but they do... It's about how you sync that. Should a sandbox be a staging site that you can then, much like content staging for websites, should you then be able to push that sandbox into live? I imagine there's a whirlwind of code that needs to be handled behind the back end for that to happen, but it would be incredibly valuable to be able to set up these staging sites and not then have to manually move them. There are external apps that can offer something to that degree that can help you with that, but it would be amazing to have that obviously inside of HubSpot, where you just click of a button, you go deploy this, much like that's kind of coming up against Salesforce there. I want to deploy this staging portal.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Or parts of it.
Yeah, or I want to deploy parts of it.
Actually, one thing that I'm sure every developer who's ever worked on HubSpot building websites in the past, God knows how many years, just fix bring the blog into the same up to the same scratch as the website pages and the landing pages that have got full drag and drop capability. They have made changes to it, but it's still not on the same level.
Not where you want it to be.
Yeah, it's not where I want it to be anyway.
Yeah. But lots has happened this year, so let's not leave on a downer. Let's leave on a plus with React and API and webhooks and all that exciting stuff. JD and Jaime, it is always an absolute pleasure to talk to you guys. You tell me stuff that I don't know, and that I just love that. So thank you very much, gents. And if people like this kind of episode, going deeper into technical stuff, let us know, because we can do more of this, and I'm sure you guys Well, you guys love being on this podcast, right?
Oh, it's highlight of my week, this, John.
It's very fun when it works.
Yes. Now, people listening won't know that our first take didn't work because I couldn't get the technology to work, and that's all my fault. So we are here, take 2 today. So, guys, thanks ever so much for your time. That is indeed a wrap. That's it for today's episode of PodSpot. Join us next time as we'll delve into more topics surrounding all things HubSpot. Remember to subscribe for more episodes, drop us a line with any ideas you may have for future content, and do leave us a review if you enjoyed today's discussion. Thanks.